Ask anybody who's been through the process of looking for a new job recently, and they're likely to tell you a story of frustration, disappointment, and possibly anger. Candidates go through the process of sending thousands of applications. They don't hear from companies. They get ghosted. They have to go through ridiculously long recruitment processes. And if they get that far, they get offered a salary that is lower than what they stated in their first interview that was their expectation. In some really bad scenarios, the company bails on them in the last minute and it's back to square one. What's going on? I'm Mike. I've got 25 years of background in business from pharma tech and consulting. I've held C-level roles in human resources in international companies. I have degrees in business, human resources, and psychology. On this channel, I cover businesses and careers. I analyze and pick apart why companies do the things they do. And I provide advice on careers and navigating the corporate world. Today, the focus is on why job hunting has turned into what feels like one of Dante's circles of hell. How did we get here? What is driving this process? And what can you do? Let's get stuck in. Do you know how I got my first full-time grown-up job? My mother opened a newspaper and saw a job ad for a role at Novo Nordisk. She sent me the ad by snail mail and I applied electronically. And 3 weeks later, after 2 interviews, I had a job. Problem 1 is the internet. For all the conveniences that the internet has given us, the advent of job sites and online job application in general has created a problem for everybody, for the companies and for the candidates. On the one hand, the internet has made it possible for a company to massively expand its reach. A small company in a small town used to have to pay for expensive ads in newspapers in the right towns to attract relevant candidates. Today, you post your job online and potentially it's available to applicants everywhere in the world. LinkedIn reports that people submit 3.3 million job applications every single day through their systems. The sheer volume has gone up, especially for big companies. The sheer number of applications that flow through the process are so great that they are massively time consuming, and there's a business demand to make the initial screening process more efficient.
Now, I'm about to make a pretty harsh claim, and my claim is that LinkedIn is to blame for this job market in 2024.
Convenience is also a problem. Tell me what you want when you buy something online. My guess is one thing you want is convenience. Whether it's buying takeout, buying clothes, or applying for a job, you want it to be easy and seamless. Go back 10, 15 years and a company would expect you to fill down a 7-page drop-down menu with information that was all readily available in your CV. They had multiple questions and steps you had to go through before you could even click on the submit button. Today, with the horror that is the LinkedIn Easy Apply system, there's almost nothing scaring a candidate away from applying. In the hunt for volume, the barrier for applications has been lowered so far that companies have exposed themselves to a barrage of applications that they do not have the capacity to deal with. I'm also in the business of recruiting you. The important thing to me, though, is that you enjoy and find this content relevant. If you do, then definitely consider clicking the subscribe button below. It spreads the word and is a very good sign for me that tells me whether or not this content is worthy of your time. Thanks so much. Problem number 3 is the managers and the recruiters' time. Recruiting processes are very different depending on companies. Largely though, there are 3 scenarios for the first step. Either you go through some sort of bot or AI tool that screens your CV, or the screening is done by HR, or the screening is done by the manager. For scenarios 2 and 3, that's a lot of time that has to be spent on either HR or the manager going through every single CV. Regardless of scenario 1, 2, or 3 though, at some point the manager has to pick some candidates and most managers do not have the time to interview. Replacing staff is time consuming and something that happens on top of everything else that is going on. And more often than not, the manager is the bottleneck. Their manager is not giving them extra time from their other duties to do the job of recruiting. This applies to the initial screening, it applies to the conversation with HR about who goes to the next round of interviews, and it applies to picking the final candidate. Some managers carve out time for recruiting, but my experience is that many kind of fit it in where they can in an already incredibly stressful day. And that inevitably leads to slow-going processes, but also processes that never really get finished. Often, when you're being ghosted, it's also because the recruiter and the manager haven't had time to talk. So the recruiter doesn't know whether to tell you that you're still in play or whether you've been qualified out. It's also priorities. The most important candidates are always the ones that are the most relevant candidates. Sending a "you didn't get selected" email may be semi-automated, but just clicking the button has a lower priority than inviting the relevant candidate to the interview. The same goes for interviews. As soon as you're no longer one of the top candidates, as soon as you move to the maybe pile, you drop down the list of priorities, which often is why you're ghosted after that first interview. My general rule of thumb is the moment they start responding slower compared to what they have so far, the more likely it is you're not the candidate they care about anymore. A lot of companies love to keep the door open until the last minute, in the sense that nobody gets told that they weren't chosen until the contract is signed with the other candidate. If that drags out, then the feedback to you is going to drag out as well. Problem number 5 is companies and HR are not particularly good at hiring. Specifically, they do to this day build recruiting processes that do not lead to good hires. They substitute control and quantity for quality. So I'm going to start this statement with a question. The statement is, there is scientific research that clearly shows how many interviews is optimal for finding the best candidates. The question is, how many interviews do you think it is? It's 2. Not 3, not 5, not 10. It's 2. Personally, the process where I had the most interviews, where I was personally through a process, was 11. It was a farce. And by the 5th interview, I had mentally withdrawn from the position, and I was just out of pure spite, just choosing to stick all the way to interview 11. And I told them no thanks when they offered me the job, stating that I saw 11 interviews as a sign that they were not competent as a management team. The reason 2 is optimal is because of 2 things that happen when you add more interviews and more interviewers. When you add more interviews and more interviewers, you introduce a massive risk of creating false negative scenarios. And when you add more interviewers, you overemphasize the need for consensus in hiring. Above 2 interviews, the predictive validity of interviews starts to drop. And it's down to the simple fact that every time you meet a candidate, the more likely you are to find something you don't like about the candidate, and you are more likely to disqualify the candidate because of that one thing. This is repeatedly proven to be the case in multiple studies, but companies keep doing it because they believe more interviews equals better decisions. And it's just not founded in anything remotely resembling fact. Google did some data for their own company where they found that 4 interviews was best for them, but the broader literature still supports that 2 interviews is better. But I do suppose for Google that it's better because they used to have up to 25 interviews for some candidates. Secondly, and Google is an incredible example of this, especially when multiple interviews are involved in the process, the desire for consensus just stalls a lot of processes. The fear of hiring a toxic colleague, or more importantly, the fear of being the person on the interview team that approved someone that turned out to be toxic, is not a label you want. Google like to pride themselves on hiring good people, but it's far more clear that more often than not, Google's hiring process is affected massively by a fear of being the person that said yes to a person that turned out to be a mishire. The fear of failure drives a pressure to complicate, lengthen, and ultimately absolve managers of their hiring responsibility. And it makes for a painful hiring process as a candidate. There just isn't that much data that supports that it leads to an improvement in quality in the selection process. If I were to point one finger squarely at HR staff, then it would be this. Some companies, not all, see candidates as fodder and treat them as such in the process. It's a mix of not having time in some companies, and it's just also sometimes an arrogance in other companies that leads some recruiters to have a very bulk mentality to candidates. Respecting candidates' time is far from the norm in some companies, not all, but some. Recruiters that are measured far more on time to hire and time to fill, and less so on candidate experience, leads to recruiters that very quickly divert their time to the promising candidates and pay no mind to all the other candidates. This is also the mechanism that drives the desire for applications and the proliferation of unrealistic expectations to qualifications and CVs. We all know the examples of job ads that are looking for graduate hires with 15 years of experience. We've seen the extensive list of nice-to-haves in the job ad that are stated as if they are non-negotiable. So people pump their CVs. This leads to companies further raising the bar, and the cycle continues where BS requirements get met with increasingly elaborate applications that don't really add value. It's a never-ending race to the bottom or top, depending on how you look at it. Unsound selection tools are also rife. Any recruiter worth their salt will tell you that a structured interview significantly improves the validity of the recruitment process. Tests and cases can, in the right situations, also increase the predictive validity of the selection process. But there's a problem. A lot of tests and cases are badly constructed, nonsensical, and do not evaluate what the company is trying to test. Case interviews need to be constructed very carefully to actually be useful. And even then, more often than not, the case designer is rarely completely clear on what exactly is being measured. You have to remember that what you should always be trying to do in an interview is to figure out whether or not the person will be successful in the job. And think of a case. How much of a case is testing critical thinking skills and how much is testing communication skills? No, wait, I think I'll give you a better example. When you vote for a politician, you do so, among other things, on what they have campaigned on and what their policy is. But consider this. Does being a good political campaigner say anything about the politician's actual ability to govern and drive policy once in office? My point is, the key skill to getting elected is not the same skill as being good at governing. Some people are really good at solving cases, and to some extent, if constructed correctly, that can indicate that they can solve other problems too. But often the case just demonstrates the person's case-solving skills. On top of all that, you have bad personality tests, ridiculous pop quizzes, and weird tests of fit, like did he take his coffee cup with him or leave it for someone else to clean up? Recruiting is full of junk that wastes a lot of people's time. Problem 8 is that it's also an AI arms race. Large companies now use applicant tracking systems that at a minimum have some sort of bulk automated sorting system. The most modern systems are AI-based tools that do the full pre-screening. In theory, at least, this removes the human error factor and it also speeds up the process. But the reality is that it has two very real downsides. Personally, I think it dehumanizes the interaction. A lot of the problems that I've described already have an element related to the business desire for speed. With 500 applicants for one role, AI reading 500 CVs is going to be seen as the cost-efficient and time-efficient solution. But it does, to me, further turn the candidate into just another number, a product that gets sorted and not as a human that has taken time to apply. Not that I have a solution, but I just don't like it. Secondly, it's an arms race that is not leading to high quality. Because what is happening on the other side of the coin? Well, as companies increasingly turn to automated processes and AI-supported screening, candidates are turning to AI to optimize their CVs and applications to match the job spec. You're essentially creating an environment where it's one AI versus another AI, which very much reminds me of the tic-tac-toe scenario from the movie War Games from 1983. This applies to application processes, but this is also making its way into screening processes where tools like HireVue are being put into place, where even the first interview is replaced by video recording sessions that is evaluated by AI. All this escalation of technology is ostensibly there to make things more efficient and devoid of human error, but the reality is it's more and more dehumanizing, both in the sense that AI is competing with AI, but also in the sense that the candidate is not viewed as a valuable individual whose time is also valuable. Finally, there's a problem that's not related to technology, and it's relationships and networking. You go through all these steps. You apply for all these jobs, and the person that gets hired is still likely to be someone that knew somebody on the hiring committee or who was connected with someone at the company. Recognition is a bad proxy for competence, but the power of knowing someone weighs much more than actually being the best candidate. For some people, this networking thing comes easy, but for a lot of people it isn't, and they lose out despite potentially being the better candidates. An over-reliance on people's ability to sell themselves through acquaintances might be relevant for a job in sales, but how it pertains to a deeply technical role is unclear, to me at least. Now, if I had a solution to all of this, I wouldn't be doing YouTube. I'd have started a business to make money off of my idea. I don't have the answer to the incoming tide of AI screening, AI interviews, and probably at some point AI salary negotiation. I don't see managers having more time for interviews, and there are likely still going to be lots of companies that push recruiters to see candidates as fodder and still rely on arbitrary and ridiculously long and convoluted selection processes. It's not the case at all firms. Some firms are serious and have effective processes, but the horror stories of companies that have one or more of these problems are too numerous to count. But is there anything you can do? Well, yes, I've got a couple of tips. Some of them are a little bit idealistic and some are very, very practical. First of all, the practical ones. Throw your CV, your application, and the job ad through that AI tool and have it put together a good CV that is matched to the role for you. Apply to what you feel is relevant. If you're thinking this role is off the beaten track for you, then the company or the algorithm will likely think so too. Apply fast. A lot of companies close the funnel as soon as they have enough candidates. 10 years ago, you should have waited till the last minute. Today, you apply as quickly as possible. Don't bother calling the recruiter to make yourself known unless you actually know someone at the company that has put a good word in for you. Ask upfront how many interviews there will be, what the timeline will be, and what you will be expected to go through. If they require tests, make sure to practice whatever tests they give you beforehand. It does make a difference. And if the tests are ridiculous, run away. If they're asking you to do a Rorschach test or something equally ridiculous, just don't go forward. It's a red flag. Then there's the idealistic stuff. Trust your gut. Withdraw the moment you feel something is off. Don't let the company, the recruiter, or the manager yank your chain. Don't waste your time on them wasting your time. Never suggest a salary that is below your minimum expectation. Your floor should be your minimum. Do not engage in a process that you feel is not respectful of you as an individual. In 25 years, I've had 5 jobs. By today's standards, that's not a lot. But every time I've actually had to apply for a new job or just tried to look for a new job, the process has been excruciating. It's time consuming, it's often demoralizing. Believe it or not, HR people are not as in demand as people with high-level cybersecurity skills. I've been ghosted by executive search firms after multiple rounds for C-suite positions. It happens to everybody. If I had a Jerry Maguire moment, I would go back to the day when everything wasn't automated, digitized, and everyone wasn't overwhelmed by the sheer volume of roles out there. But that's not going to happen. So, what's your experience with applying for a job these days? What have been good experiences and what are your horror stories? Share them in the comments. And also, remember to subscribe if you enjoyed the content. See you soon. Cheers.